Hey everybody, hope you are doing well today. We are going to be looking at what microservices are and how they fit into our cloud environment. Now, most of you probably at this point in your career have probably heard of microservices, would be my guess. And it might be a buzzword, it might be something that you deal with on a daily basis. If so, you probably already know what's going to be in this module. But it is something worth talking about because, again, it is kind of not a new-ish paradigm, but it is something that is becoming very common. What a microservice is really just an application that does a very small thing, right? So do you think of your normal applications, whether it's a web app, whether it's a phone app, standard application, whatever you're using, it is this big piece of software that maybe you compile down to a binary executable. Maybe it's an APK that you put up on the Play Store, whatever it is. It's some big cohesive thing, right? We'll call that a monolithic application. Everything is internalized, everything is one part of this large package. Where microservices come into play is that these big monolithic applications can be deconstructed into smaller and smaller components. Think of perhaps your object-oriented programming background, your software engineering backgrounds, wherever you may draw from for this idea. But we tend to think of software as basically reusable components, right? So a microservice is basically a very, very small part of your application that has been turned into some form of service. Now, this is typically going to be something that is accessible via the internet or it is networked in some fashion because it's going to be a running service on a server somewhere whose sole job is to take in data, transform it in some way, and then spit it back out to wherever it needs to go. Now, this figure that you're seeing here on the screen, we basically have as kind of a standard web application storefront type of thing where perhaps you go in and you order products and it gets shipped to you and then you get your product, very Amazon or eBay like or any online retailer really. But what you see here is a typical monolithic application. All of these pieces would be one cohesive framework. Whereas here, you kind of see different components that are split up, and each of these has a little interface to allow connections in or data in, and then a method for sending data out. So this is from microservices.io, nice little architecture to kind of show off an example here. Let's say we are on our browser, so you're on your computer, you have a web browser open, you go to the store's web page. Okay, well, this storefront could be a microservice. And if you do the monolithic to microlithic code lab that I've got posted, later on in this blog, you are effectively doing this. You have a very large React application. It's been set up as a Docker container that we use Cloud Build and Cloud Run to set up and get off and running. But it's one big thing, right? It's one big application. Here, each one of these pieces has been split off as a microservice. So we have a web app, or sorry, we have a storefront, meaning that simply the landing page of the website is a small microservice. Maybe it is a Flask Python server. Maybe it's a Node server. Maybe it's a simple little Apache web page. But the point is, it doesn't do anything other than serve as the front end. You connect to this via the web, and then you get the information you need right in front of you. This storefront, then via RESTful API calls, and if you remember what those are, it's basically like an HTTP formatted request for information. You get data back as text or as JSON or whatever format your service is packaging it up and sending it as. It's being fed by these other services. So here we have the storefront. It's getting account information, it's getting inventory information, it's getting shipping information, where these are their own separate microservices running wherever they need to be run from. Could be the same server, could be geographically distributed, just kind of depends on your application. But these things are their own services in and of their own right. They are not part of a single application here. They in turn talk to their various databases that they need to, or they talk to, whatever data source they need, or they might talk to other services, just kind of depends. But the key here, again, is that these are all separated and very tiny, bite-sized applications. They're microservices, right? So what you're seeing here This was just one perspective, the browser. Well, maybe you have a mobile phone, Android, Windows Phone, um, Apple, whatever mobile device you've got, you talk to a phone application instead of a browser. I mean, you can obviously use browser too, but then you'd be redirected here. If you have the phone app, well, this thing could be talking to an API gateway, which still talks to these services. Perhaps you skip the web app, the storefront that browser users see, but you still access all the other services as normal. To you as the user, this is seamless. You don't really notice a difference. But from the backend perspective, this is kind of desirable in a way. And the main reason why it's desirable is that each of these services, by being separate, they can be maintained separately, they can be reused in other applications, they can be scaled, distributed if we're doing load balancing. Basically, they become their own little piece to be managed. Let's say that at some point we decide we're going to add a bunch of fields into our ordering system, right? So our inventory has an ID, it has a product name, has a description. Maybe we're going to start adding in other fields to sort by or to, add metadata to. Well, in a typical application, we would have to rebuild the whole thing, right? And that could be very painful depending on your process. But here, let's say it's just part of our inventory service. We only have to update one little piece of the application. And that doesn't necessarily impact other pieces, other microservices, right? Now, the storefront and the database probably need to know this extra information, but the account service, the shipping service, they don't need to know that. So basically, we can kind of micromanage our infrastructure in a nice way. Now, another perspective here from Microsoft, you see basically this nice separation of concerns, and that's another way to really describe microservices as well. Basically, you're splitting things apart. Okay, so you may have a client, an API gateway, which we're kind of getting into with cloud endpoints. AWS and Azure have their own names for these types of services. But basically, you are, again, just kind of divesting your needs to these various microservices, which, again, are tiny little applications. We don't care what language they are. Could be Node, Python, C Sharp, C++.NET, whatever you like, but it should be accessible and be able to format data in some way, shape, or form. So I've got a couple of slides from Google here to really help you hopefully visualize these. And again, I would highly recommend checking out that code lab on monolithic to microlithic. It's broken up into 3 videos because it takes a while. And it does some nifty things with Docker and Kubernetes and things of that nature. But one of the key notions here is that if you are going to go ahead and do this, this type of development strategy, it's very good to kind of plan it out early on. If you're planning to build some sort of an application, maybe consider, can pieces of it be split off into microservices? Maybe it's not worth the effort. Maybe it's a smaller application and you don't need that level of compartmentalization, or maybe it would be actually very helpful where you can kind of compartmentalize your concerns in this application. And this is going to be a study of trade-offs for you too. Not every big application needs to be turned into microservices. Again, it can be considered a buzzword by some, but it can be helpful. Again, you can split up your applications into manageable pieces. Maybe they should be managed in parallel, basically. Some things don't impact other things, so we can perform updates on microservice 1. Microservices 2 through 10 don't get impacted. You can reuse microservices or leverage them in multiple applications, in which case you can almost think of it like a package that you're importing or something of that nature. But I guess regardless, enough kind of belaboring the point, this is something that you should plan out very early on. Because if you build a big application and it goes live to production, breaking it into pieces later may be more trouble than it's worth. So it's just kind of one of those things where maybe you do a quick analysis before you actually build this thing and then, see where you can go. Or, build them one microservice at a time and see how it works. The other thing that we can really look at here is that with Google Cloud or any of the other providers, you're going to have a lot of supporting frameworks to help you out here. So in at least Google Cloud, you can use technologies like cloud endpoints, where we've got a couple of examples of that here as well. We're not getting into Apogee at all in this class, but that is one other option for providing endpoints and basically being able to work with lots of different services and providers. But that kind of takes some of the headache off of managing that RESTful API gateway for you. And things like this can handle as facilitators for routing. Um, and then on the back end, maybe these are cloud functions hosted in Google Cloud. Maybe they're App Engine programs. Could be Kubernetes deployments that you're running. Again, that's what that big monolithic to microlithic lab is all about. But just kind of the key here is that what I really wanted to do was tease apart this buzzword term for you. So the microservice, everybody's excited about it in the industry more or less. It's really just taking a big application and breaking it into pieces. And I'm way oversimplifying, obviously. You need a RESTful API, you need a networked infrastructure, you need. But at its core, it's really not that crazy of a process. And as a software engineer, or as somebody interested in code reuse or managing the entire process of software engineering, these are very attractive to kind of streamline things for you. Anyway, that's enough on microservices for this video. Please check out the code labs, run through a few of them. They're actually quite interesting for how you can kind of tease apart a big application, break it into little pieces. So anyway, hope you had fun. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.